You're listening to Ox Talk Radio, the official podcast of the new Saint Thomas Institute. Howdy, my Oxen. This is Taylor Marshall. Today we're going to look at an issue that's becoming even more difficult, even more controversial for Catholics like us, and that is the issue of same-sex marriage. Last week, the Supreme Court in the United States of America legalized same-sex marriage. So today we're going to look at some of the objections that people bring against the Catholic teaching, and also look at this objection that people bring up, Catholics that are well-meaning sometimes, that say, we Catholics personally believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, but we can't legislate other people, and therefore we should support same-sex marriage. We're going to look at how that relates to nature and grace through the lens of Saint Thomas Aquinas. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to all of you members of the new Saint Thomas Institute, the mighty, mighty Musk Oxen. This is Taylor Marshall, and I am back from Rome. It was a wonderful experience. I was teaching there seminarians for the Rome Experience, and the Rome Experience is an amazing apostolate founded by a great priest, Father Jim Sosias, in which seminarians apply and receive scholarships to go to Rome and for 6 weeks study, pray, attend Mass, meet with cardinals, meet with archbishops, go to Masses with the Pope, and take courses on architecture, which is important because these seminarians will go on to be pastors, and most pastors have never been trained in architecture, never been trained in sacred art, and yet they are tasked with overseeing multi-million-dollar building projects, and yet they have no experience. So one of the things that this ministry does, the Rome Experience, is to train future priests, future pastors to create beautiful traditional churches. They also learn theology. That's where I came in. I was teaching a historical theology class on the Old Testament as it relates to Rome and the early church. We went all the way up from Daniel to the first and second Maccabees with the Roman alliance with Israel, up into the reign of Augustus, and with a little bit of Roman history, and then through the Gospels and the book of Acts and the 10 Roman persecutions of the early church, and then all the way up to Constantine and the Constantinian Revolution with the construction of the major basilicas there in Rome, and then the aftermath of that. And it was an absolutely fantastic class. The seminarians were excellent. I was completely impressed. And then during the rest of the day, we would go to the beautiful churches. We would go look at art. We would go see the relics. We would visit the Vatican Museum. And most importantly, we would pray together. We'd pray the rosary. We'd have Mass every day in the Vatican. We were living there on a Vatican territory, which was incredible. In the evenings, we would go up on the roof, and we would have a get-together with the seminarians, and we'd pray the rosary looking down on St. Peter's Square and St. Peter's Basilica. Just a wonderful time. So glad to be part of it. But I'm also thankful to be home because there's lots of work to do back here, including this new act by the Supreme Court legalizing same-sex marriage. And I want to camp out on that today with you and to walk through the Catholic Church's thinking on homosexuality. I know we've dedicated an entire NSTI lesson, our module on controversial Catholic teachings in our certificate for apologetics has it. I know a lot of you have watched that video lesson, hundreds of you have watched that video lesson already, and have been leaving comments and questions, and we continue to try to answer your questions there. And today I want to spend a lot of time on it because I think every single one of us who bears the name Christian, every single one of us who says, I'm a Catholic, I believe in the magisterium of the Catholic Church. I uphold the moral teachings of Christ and his apostles and his popes. We need to be ready to give an answer and to make a witness. And I read something over the weekend that broke my heart. Whereas 30% of evangelical Christians in America agree with same-sex marriage and support the United States Supreme Court decision to legalize same-sex marriage. 70% of American Catholics approve of same-sex marriage and support the Supreme Court decision to legalize same-sex marriage. And this isn't just an American issue. I know that there are, not quite half of the NSTI is people from outside of the United States. So I don't want this to sound like an American podcast or an American show, because it's something that affects all of us Catholics, all Christians all over the world. Recently Ireland had the same decision. We're seeing it in South America. Already nations in Europe have been going the same way, and I suspect it probably will be a global phenomenon. And that leaves us as Catholics, who are global Christians, universal Christians, literally Catholic Christians, it leaves us needing to provide solid answers based not only in Scripture, not only in tradition, but increasingly in natural law. That's where we need to get strong, and unfortunately, that's where most of us are the weakest. None of us received any training in natural law when we were doing our catechism classes for First Communion. None of us, well, I shouldn't say none, most of us didn't get any training in natural law when we went through confirmation, which is unfortunate. When we took, intro to philosophy classes at college, university, we didn't learn about natural law. And so here at the New Saint Thomas Institute, we're going to fix that. We're going to teach you what you need to know about natural law. It's going to help you in so many categories and so many moral issues. It's going to help you with your debate skills, and hopefully it will make you convincing and bring people over to the truth, which is what we're really all about as Christians and also as members of the New St. Thomas Institute, leading people to the truth, because that which is true is good, and even more attractive, that which is true and good is beautiful. And people are going to fall in love with Jesus Christ again. We can reignite a Christian revolution, a new evangelization, if we can present the gospel as beautiful. This is what we've lost. I think people see the gospel, or what they think is the gospel, the message of Christians, as ugly. I was on Facebook. Someone I know put up a post. It was by an angry Christian Protestant leader about this issue of same-sex marriage and homosexuality. And it was kind of off color and rude. And this person wrote, who I know personally very well, "If this is who Christians are, I don't want to be in heaven with them, period." And I thought, wow, we as Christians are making the gospel ugly. And we know from Catholic tradition, we know from Saint Thomas Aquinas, that which is good and that which is true is beautiful. And that doesn't mean that people who have hardened hearts or people who aren't of goodwill will be repulsed by the truth. We know that's the case. Just read Romans chapter 1. We know that is the case. Yet, there is something deep in the heart of every human person created in the image of God, those who have rationality as a gift from God, who find something beautiful, something attractive in what we have as Catholics, what we have in the sacraments and with the saints and with the life of grace that we live. So we need to present the gospel as beautiful. And I think that's something that we're doing pretty well at the New St. Thomas Institute. We're pushing the truth. We're pushing the good. We're not holding back on faith and morals. We're trying to be 100%, not 99%, but 100% faithful to the magisterium. But we're also trying to teach all of you how you can share the gospel in a way that's not ugly, harsh, sour, bitter. Like we say in the podcast, we have to be salt and light. We have to go out there and be salty. When I was in Rome, I learned this new way to eat salad. In America here, we get salad, which is healthy, onions, tomatoes, lettuce, olives. And then in America, we just dump tons of thick, heavy salad dressing on the salad, like blue cheese or, ranch or thick and chunky ranch or ranch with bacon bits in it. When I was in Italy and you order a salad, it's great lettuce, tomatoes, olives, maybe some cucumbers, onions, maybe even some eggs. And then they put salt on it and maybe drizzle a little bit of olive oil. And that's the salad. And so I, at first, was kind of, not used to eating salad without all the dressings that we have in America. But after about the second week, I really started to appreciate this subtle way of enjoying a salad. And I began to really enjoy the flavor of the lettuce and the flavor of the onion and the flavor of the tomato. And the salt on it brought out all those natural vegetable flavors. And then it hit me. The reason a salad is called salad, it comes from the Latin word sal, S-A-L, sal. Sal is salt. And so a salad is basically vegetables, lettuce that you put salt on. And by putting salt on it, you make it a salad. In America, we think of it as vegetables with the big dressing on it. But originally, it's just this salt. And the salt brings out the flavor. And if you dump too much salt, of course, the salad is ruined. But just enough salt brings it out. And that's what we need to do as Catholics. We need to have not American salads, but Roman salads, where we have all the ingredients, and then we maybe put a little oil in there. Maybe the oil signifies Christ, who's the Messiah, or maybe it signifies our own confirmation as soldiers of Christ. And then we have to sprinkle salt over the salad, and that's what brings the flavor out. That's what we need to do. We need to salt this world. Okay, so let's get started. Well, I was, like I said earlier, disappointed to see this happen in the United States, but deep down I knew this was going to happen sooner or later. It's the direction of our media. It's the direction of the polls. It's the direction of our overly sexualized culture here in the United States. The United States is an extremely sexual culture. We are exporting pornography. We are exporting movies that aren't considered pornography but are in fact pornographic because they have, inordinate nudity, sex scenes, etc. And homosexuality, rightly understood, as we read in Romans chapter 1 from St. Paul, is just a continuation along the road of licentiousness. There is something about sexuality that, if not rightly ordered in the sacrament of matrimony, always needs novelty, always needs something new, always needs a new thrill. And in our culture, people are looking for a way to take it to the next level. And homosexuality is kind of the end game for that. We see this in societies that are given over to luxury and decadence. All we have to do is go back to the ancient Greeks, time of Socrates, time of Plato, relatively an easy time period. The Greek culture is on the ascendancy. Alexander the Great goes on to extend it. And so we see homosexuality taking root in that society. We see the same thing in the Roman society. Really, it happens after the Romans secure their imperium over the Mediterranean. So after the time of Christ, moving into the 50s and the 60s AD, under Nero in the mid-60s, reaches its high point. Nero, I think, would be the first person in history to have a civilly recognized homosexual marriage. If I remember correctly, he was in that marriage that he had for himself and for his partner, he took on a feminine role, which is kind of odd since he was the emperor. So we see it there, and we see it in our own time period. America has entered into its most prosperous time period. Even the homeless people here in America have cell phones. They have plenty of food. not plenty, there are people who do go hungry in America, especially children, which is horrible. But our social services, I know employment is not at its all-time high points here in America, but still, I think quality of life, everybody has heat, air conditioning, money comes from the government, we have subsidized housing, subsidized food, and we have an endless buffet of entertainment. And so we have moved on to exploring the outer edges of thrills and of sexual stimulation. So we see it really in this turn towards an interest in homosexuality and the blurring of gender and transgenderism. And as Catholics, we do need to recognize that within fallen nature, since Adam and Eve, we do have people who are born with physically, not just emotionally, but physically confused gender, confused genitalia. There are people that used to be called hermaphrodites, we probably shouldn't use that term, who have confused sexual organs. We have people who are raised in broken environments and either hormonally or environmentally are raised with a confused understanding of gender and of sexuality. And all of this is a fallout of the culture rejecting Christ. And that doesn't mean that we need to blame all these people who suffer from these confusions and these disorders. Many of them are goodwill. Many of them are very wonderful people. Many of them are wonderful Christians, wonderful Catholics who are taking up their cross and living lives of heroic virtue. And we commend them and we love them. Actually, we love all of these people. And we reach out to them and we need to seek ways to minister to them. And because of this, there are a lot of Catholics who are well-meaning, they're of goodwill, but they say, we don't need to have any discrimination, as it says in the Catechism. We need to help these people. We want them to live lives that are full of fruition and peace and happiness, and they need to have the same kind of rights that we have, and we agree with that. And so they say, although we are Catholics, and we don't believe that the sacrament of matrimony could ever be entered into by three people, or by a man and a man, or by a woman and a woman, or by a human and an animal. We believe it must be a human male and a human female. We need to help these people civilly by giving them full access to a civil union, to a marriage. And it's only just, and it's only right. It's really a extension of social justice. We Catholics should be supporting this. This is the argument. Now, I'm going to show you why this is incorrect and why it's misguided. And I'm 99% sure that someone in your family or your circle of friends who is a Catholic or is a Christian thinks in the way that I just described. They think, yes, marriage is for a man and a woman. Christian marriage is for man and a woman. It's for procreation, for a family. But as Catholics or as Christians, we need to support civil same-sex unions, civil same-sex marriages, because it's only just, it's only right. All right. How do we deal with this? Well, we need to go back to nature and grace. And to help us is Saint Thomas Aquinas, which is, of course, appropriate because we're the new Saint Thomas Institute. And we love Saint Thomas Aquinas, and we always go back to him. This morning, as I was prepping for this podcast, this Ox Talk, I went back and I was reading the articles in the Summa Theologiae, in the supplement, on marriage. And what I was curious to look for is, I know he talks about homosexuality in the Secunda Pars, but I wanted to see if he actually talked about it in his treatment on marriage. I mean, wouldn't that be great if Thomas did that? And although I didn't read every single article, I skimmed through them, and I've read them before, and I'm familiar with them. And I couldn't find anywhere where he deals directly with homosexuality in his discussion on marriage. And that shouldn't really surprise us, because in the 13th century they had a very rooted understanding of nature, of natural law, of propriety, and also the sacraments. And it probably would have not crossed their minds that the government, that the civil authorities would grant marriage to a man and a man, or a woman and a woman. So it's not really there. So you might think to yourself, well, Thomas Aquinas is ambivalent on that issue. He doesn't talk about it. Well, not so fast. Thomas Aquinas, if you were here with us, if you're here on the microphone with me, would point us to nature. He would have us look at the birds and the bees. And the reason we talk about the birds and the bees especially is because it relates back to pollen. And the birds and the bees is the way that parents would describe human sexuality to their children. This is exactly how I did it with my oldest son. And I'll probably do it with all the rest of my kids, as you talk about pollen and how trees release pollen. It's that yellow stuff that gets all over your car and gets in your nose and makes you sneeze. But that pollen comes out of the male part of the tree and goes into the female part of the tree, which we call a flower. And often the birds and the bees, but especially the bees, bring that pollen to the flower. And when the pollen interacts inside the flower, a seed is created. And that seed goes into the ground and becomes a baby tree or a baby plant. And then it grows up and the circle of life happens again. Same thing happens in the animal kingdom. You know, the horse, the male horse, has a kind of pollen inside of him. And that pollen goes into the female horse, and that creates a little embryo, a little seed, and that goes on to become a new horse. And then the same thing happens in humans. The male human has a kind of pollen in him, semen, that goes into the female human, and that creates an embryo, creates a new human, a new baby. And that's a very simple and honest and accurate description of how life is procreated, how God designed things. And of course, when it comes to, you know, the male human and the female human, there are no bees involved. It gets a little bit more dicey when your kids start asking questions about those details. But we can see here this pattern in nature. And all you have to do is, you can ask anyone, you can ask the most, you know, pro-homosexual doctor in the world, you know, why does the male have the genitalia that he has? And why does the female have the genitalia she has? And the reason, of course, is naturally these are sexual organs to exchange genetic material, so that the male can insert genetic material into the female, just as the pollen goes into the flower. These are why the organs are there. And so, because this is the case, human societies from the time of Adam and Eve, from the very first two parents, have ratified this union. Furthermore, if we look at the way humans are conceived and the development of humans, unlike horses, where the baby horse comes out of the mother's womb and begins to walk and run immediately, and begins to nurse in the mother, and then very, quickly becomes an adult, fully mature horse, or we see it with pigs or chickens. In most species, the progeny grows up very quickly and enters into the mature adult herd or society. For humans, it's not like that. Unfortunately, it takes us like 18 years to bring one of those babies to maturity. And then even 18 years is not enough. Sometimes we need 21 years. Because of that, it requires both parents, the male and the female, to protect, nurture, and educate that child, which means that those two parents are invested in the life of that new baby. We also usually have one baby at a time, not multiples like in the pigs or sometimes in dogs or kittens. My wife and I have had twins. That's rare. But we have one at a time, and these children need to be raised. And they need the father to provide the food, the home, the protection, the safety, and they need the mother to provide the milk and the softness and the protection and the care that a child needs. And to further see this in nature, for example, in all the mammal species, the mother has breasts, and the breasts produce milk. Of course, you might be smiling to yourself like, Taylor, we know all this, but I think it's important. We've become so crazy and so sexualized in Western society that we think breasts are somehow like entertainment features, but they're actually there to nourish the child, to nourish the baby. And the only reason men are attracted to them is because they are signs of fertility, that the child will be nourished. I mean, we've been so divorced from natural law and from the natural functions of even our own bodies that we need to be reminded of this. So the mother whose body is softer and tender and who has the breasts that bring nourishment to the child, ideally for the first year. In ancient cultures, children used to nurse till about age 3, and this helps them not only with gaining fat and protein, but also the antibodies and to help their autoimmune system to be strong to fight against diseases and plagues and infections and all kinds of things. So this is the natural structure of our bodies. It's the natural structure of gender. It's the natural structure of procreation and the natural structure of nurture. And in modern society, all of this has been destroyed and fractured. So there's great confusion about what it is, what our bodies are, what gender is, and what sex is. Because starting in, I think it was March 1961, the birth control pill came out. And women began to introduce synthetic hormones, not even real hormones, synthetic hormones into their bodies so they would not become pregnant. And what this did for millions of women is it put them in a state of being synthetically, and I want to keep using that word, synthetically pregnant. This messed up women's hormones in a way that we don't even fully appreciate. It also messes up the way that men relate to and understand women. This has been going on now for 50 years. And we're still, I think, we're just now seeing the full array of symptoms that has come from this technological revolution. And I don't think people became any more evil in and of themselves beginning in the 60s. I think if you went back even into the 1200s when Thomas Aquinas was alive and you started selling birth control pill, I think that the Catholic women of Europe would have been more resistant. But over time, I think women would have gravitated to the birth control pill because birthing babies is hard work. My lovely wife, Joy, is pregnant with our 8th child. And let me tell you, she is a hero. She's like a marathon runner, even more than a marathon runner. It's difficult, it's uncomfortable, and even after you have the baby, there is the sleepless nights and the nursings, and then as they get to be teenagers, you deal with that. It is not easy. You need the 4 cardinal virtues, at least, if not the extra 3 theological virtues, to do this. And we see, going back to Adam and Eve, this curse from sin relating to childbearing. This is why St. Paul says women shall be saved through childbearing. We don't want to hear all this stuff anymore, but again, we need to go back to nature, back to sin, back to these ideas of grace so that we can rightly understand where we've been, where we were going, and, well, where we are going, either in the right way or in the wrong way. So I think if you went back in time and offered women, even in the Old Testament, the birth control pill, they probably would have flocked to it. And of course, men like it because that gives them instant gratification all the time, but they don't have to make any financial, emotional commitment to the women or to the children. So I think men always want to kind of go to the easiest route. The less chivalrous route is the way they always want to go. It's the easy way to go. So I think both men and women at every age would have been interested in this birth control option. But what it's done is, and we didn't expect it to happen, but what it's done is it's confused us altogether, and it's made us forget why we have these procreative organs. It's made us forget what a man is. All these women who are on the birth control pill and they're starting to turn 30 and they want to get married and they can't find a man. They're saying, where have all the men gone? Well, this is what happens. And even men who want to marry, and they're still looking for that traditional bride. Not so many out there anymore. Why is that? Well, go back to 1961. Look at what we're doing to ourselves. We're synthetically changing our hormones. We're synthetically changing the way that the opposite sexes relate to each other. And so, because of that, we no longer see marriage in a natural way. We see marriage as a convenience. Matrimony is the ultimate friends with benefits relationship, and pardon me for being frank in this Ox Talk. It is a way for two people, male and female, male, female, to live together, to have companionship, to help each other when they're sick, to go to dinner parties, and to find fulfillment in one another. To have both a platonic fulfillment and a sexual fulfillment. That's what marriage is. And so if that's what it is, why can't a girl and a girl experience that? Why can't a boy and a boy experience that? Why not? Think about it. Most heterosexual marriages in the United States are synthetically sterile. They don't produce children on purpose. Why? Because they don't see marriage as oriented towards the procreation of new humans. The birds and the bees have been forgotten. That whole idea of pollen and the flower and a new seed and fertility and that being celebrated is no longer on the first page of marriage. Yeah, I mean, you can have kids and, you can have a career and then later on you can adopt a child or, you can do an in vitro or, you can do that if you're heterosexual and you can do that if you're homosexual. So, we don't really need it. And that's the problem. This is the systematic, fundamental problem in the Western culture and soon will be on the global culture for marriage. And the only people at the end of the day who are going to be standing there and saying, well, no, excuse me, marriage is actually something more than that. There's a good in marriage, something true about marriage, something beautiful about marriage that's just not about friendship and state rights and living in the same abode and sex. There's something more to it, and that is, drum roll, the preservation of human society. In order for there to be a human society 300 years from now, people need to have babies. And having babies in vitro or in a test tube or all that is not enough. People need to have babies and they need to raise and educate babies. And we humans were designed and were cultivated and sculpted in nature through the providential hand of God to be social, to be sexual, and to raise our offspring in a certain way. Now, it's true that, two women could get a sperm donor and be inseminated and give birth to a child and raise that child and provide 3 square meals a day and drive them to school. And they could even drive them to a Catholic school. Who knows, right? And they could do that. But all of us know in our gut that if that were the norm, if that is how society continues, it's going to break apart. Because we know that all of us are male and female, and at the end of the day, even a lesbian couple needs a man to bring about the new life. So we can do all these, we can do all this in a synthetic way, but the more synthetic we get, the less healthy we get. Just think about it. Do you want your food to be synthetically prepared? Do you want synthetic hormones injected into the animals you eat? Do you want them to live in synthetic environments? Or do you want them to live in a natural environment? Do you want their life to be as close as possible to nature without synthetic hormones and synthetic antibiotics and synthetic stalls and plastics and all of that? No. We want natural, healthy food. When you get jelly or jam, do you want it made by a farmer who grew it and smashed it and put it in that jar? Or do you want it going through a factory? Which one do you want? Well, we all want the natural. But yet, in our society, in our culture, we're going into the factory with false hormones and in vitro and all this synthetic lab work. And we're trying to create a new society in the laboratory. And that never works. It's never good. The more synthetic you introduce, the more laboratory introduce, the more you get things like cancer. Because it's artificial. And nature, Mother Nature, created by God, rebels against the synthetic. It doesn't work. Either nature fails or she rebels. She fights back. That's what we're starting to see right now. It's only going to get worse. I'm sorry to say. It's only going to get worse because we are injecting synthetic hormones in our women, and we are going more and more towards a synthetic form of procreation. And remember, the way that we prepare the next generation has always been through marriage. 100% up into this generation, up into this generation, every single generation, from our first two parents to now, marriage, whether you lived in a pagan culture, a Jewish culture, a Muslim culture, a Christian culture, marriage was the way for the next generation to be cultivated and prepared. Wasn't always done in the best ways. Things like divorce and polygamy have always plagued, and infidelity have always plagued humanity. And where we see those things happening, we see broken cultures. We see poverty. We see war. But wherever we see marriage honored and elevated, we see peace. We see prosperity. We see abundance. That's what we want. Why? Because it's natural. Just like if you eat good natural foods and you have natural exercise and walk around and move about and get some sunshine and get fresh air and smell the roses, you will have a health about you, an abundance of energy, clean water, all that. But the more you're exposed to the synthetic, you're under the fluorescent light bulb, you're in the plastic cubicle, you breathe in the smog. Your relationships are more and more regulated to Facebook instead of face-to-face. That's when you will become less of who you are, less human, more broken, more depressed. Trust me, I know. I'm an American. I've lived it. I've lived in the synthetic and in the natural, and I know. I thrive in the natural. So what we need to do as Catholics is we need to talk about nature. We need to talk about why we are the way we are. This is called teleological ontology. Teleological ontology. Teleological means moving towards a goal, moving towards a telos, moving towards a purpose. And ontology is the study of being, the study of how things are. So we believe as Catholics, the way things are are oriented towards a goal. Why do men and women have the sexual organs that they have? Because they are oriented towards the goal of having babies in a natural way. And when babies are conceived in the natural way between a man and a woman who love each other and who have made a lifelong commitment to each other, those babies are born into loving families where there's a father and a mother who care for them until they reach the age of majority, 18. And then those people go on to be virtuous and natural and carry the torch of decency and goodness to the next generation. Now, there's another element here, and that's the sacrament. Now, the sacrament of matrimony is never going to change. It's never going to be open to same-sex unions because we, as Catholics, embrace the natural. But Thomas Aquinas teaches us that grace perfects nature. Grace elevates nature. Grace heals nature. And grace only operates where nature already exists. For example, God's grace can't save a person who doesn't, by nature, have a body and a soul. The grace works upon the body and the soul of the human. It lifts up the human nature. It elevates human nature. It heals human nature. And so it's wonderful that Christ and Our Lady, the first miracle was the changing of water into wine at the wedding of Cana. Christ, at this moment, according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, elevates marriage from an office, an institution of nature, to a sacrament, one of the 7 sacraments. Grace perfects nature. Now, when Christ was at the wedding of Cana, he knew that Western governments in the future were going to legalize same-sex marriage. He knew that. He knew that the United States Supreme Court would legalize same-sex marriage. He elevated marriage as a sacrament to give us the strength in these times. And he changed water into wine. Now, what is the meaning of this? Water is natural. Wine is something elevated. Of course, the majority ingredient in wine is water, but it's elevated. It has a wonderful taste that people in all cultures love, and it has alcohol in it, which makes us feel great. Trust me, I just got back from Italy and enjoyed the wine, and wine makes you feel great. It changes something from just a ho-hum celebration into a party. It elevates the spirit. Of course, like all things, it can be abused. It can lead to drunkenness, which of course is a mortal sin, as we talked about in the new Saint Thomas Institute. See that video lesson in the apologetics course. But it's elevated. And what we need to say in this time period is, Lord, in our own marriages, we have water. Give us the wine. Transubstantiate water into wine. Lord, in our culture, in our nations, in our societies, marriage is being reduced to wine, or even worse than wine. Can you please come and change it into wine? Oh, I think I just said wine. We have water. Change it into wine. Help us to celebrate what is natural and what has become supernatural by your miraculous hand. And of course, our Blessed Mother is standing right there at Cana. When Christ elevates marriage to that of a sacrament, she is with him. And so we always need to turn to our Blessed Lady. She is the icon of virginity. She's the icon of chastity. She's the icon of purity. She's also an icon of marriage, because remember, Our Lady was truly married. She and Saint Joseph were in a perfect marriage. They raised a child together. Yes, of course, the child was virginally born, immaculate, without original sin, just as his mother was. But they raised a child, and they are a model for us. Of course, Joseph and Mary become the parents for every single person who's baptized and placed into Christ. They are raising all of us. We can look to the Holy Family during these times. We need to pray to the Holy Family because I think it's going to get worse. I think we're going to get persecuted. We're going to be asked to accept it, not just on the realm of nature, but on the realm of grace. They're going to want us to have same-sex marriages in the churches, at the altar rails, at the altars. They are going to ask it, and they're probably going to take away our tax-free status if we don't comply in the years to come. So we need to pray. We need to be ready. We need to strengthen our bishops because our bishops are going to have to fight fights that they probably don't expect. It's going to happen. So we need to pray. And then on the ground, you and me, what we just talked about in this last 45 minutes of nature, we need to explain this argument from nature and let them see, guys, you are creating a synthetic society, an unnatural society. We need to go back to nature. Yeah, we want to eat whole foods. Why don't we have whole marriage? Why don't we have a whole society? Why don't we make sure that all of our children grow up in a whole foods, whole marriage, whole society, whole household? If we don't do that, we're going to go off a cliff. It's going to get really, really ugly. Well, hey, I want to leave you with a word of hope. We Christians, we Catholics have faced much worse than this. When I was in Rome, we went through the 10 Roman persecutions. There were 10 persecutions from the time of Nero up until the time of Diocletian, which is the period in my novel, Sword and Serpent, about St. George. And if you want to learn more about what that persecution was like, it was the worst of them all. Check out the book. It's historical fiction, but it's still historical. It gives you an idea of what it was like as a Christian to live under profound Roman persecution. We will endure. We will win. There have been court cases. Well, Christ himself was condemned in an illicit court case. He was condemned by the Jewish court. He was condemned by Pontius Pilate, but he rose again. Even if they kill us, which they could, even if they seek to make us martyrs, we will live forever. We will rise from the dead and be glorious, glorious martyrs, like all those martyrs in Rome. And if they don't, we will be faithful witnesses. I am extremely hopeful. I don't think the last word has been said. I actually still have hope that my nation and your nation all over the world could still be converted to Christ. It could still happen. Don't rule out the supernatural. Don't rule out a future Marian apparition. Don't rule out the conversion of a major political leader like Constantine. God has surprised the world over and over again. Just when things look down and out for the Christians in Rome, Constantine legalized Christianity. Just when things looked down and out in Russia and Portugal, Our Lady of Fatima appeared. Just when things looked down and out with the Aztecs and there were no conversions, Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared to Juan Diego. Just when things looked down and out and the church was crumbling apart and there were heresies and confusions and popes that weren't living all that great, a little friar, St. Francis, had a dream. He heard the crucifix speak to him, rebuild my church. God always provides, and he does it in a way that surprises us. And maybe you, listening to this Ox Talk, maybe you are the next St. Francis. Maybe you are the next mover and shaker that God is calling to transform. I'm sure he's calling all of us, but maybe he's calling you in a special way. Start a new movement. Write that book. Do whatever it is to start the next revolution for the gospel of Jesus Christ. Well, hey, thanks for being a member of the New Saint Thomas Institute. Thanks for being a muskox. I love watching your progress. We've got the progress bars in there. I can see where everybody is, how fast you're moving, what you're watching. I love your comments. Please continue to leave the comments. And especially, till next time, remember that our Lord Jesus Christ said that you are the light of the world and the salt of the earth. So go out there and be salty. Hey, this is Taylor, and I just want to remind you that coming out in this next month at the new Saint Thomas Institute is a new module, How to Lead People Back into the Catholic Church. It's part of our certificate in Catholic apologetics, and I think this is going to be very popular in the next 2 months. It's going to be very helpful because we're going to look at why people leave the Catholic Church and what you can do to help bring them back. So make sure you check every Tuesday as Thomas Tuesday. Come in and look for new content and look for these special classes, these special lessons on how you can lead people back into the Catholic Church. God bless.